Hi everyone, my name is Jen and welcome to my channel, Happy Hapa. For those of you that are new to my channel, I'm an Asian American young professional living in Singapore. I created this channel to not only document my experience living in Singapore, but also share helpful advice with all of you. I can't believe it, but I've already been living in Singapore for 6 months, and I thought now would be a great time to reflect on my experience living here so far. Today I'm going to share the 5 best and worst parts about living in Singapore based on my experience. When I first moved to Singapore 6 months ago, I had never even visited, and I pretty much knew no one aside from my small team of coworkers. In my experience, there are some cities where friend groups are more insular and it's harder to meet new people and make new friends. Luckily, this wasn't the case in Singapore because in the past few months, I've built some strong friendships with other expats and Singaporeans. Being such a global business hub, people are always coming and going from Singapore. And I think that dynamic creates more opportunity to meet new people and make new friends. One thing I did before I moved was I reached out to pretty much everyone in my life and asked them to introduce me to anyone that they knew living in Singapore. This way, I was able to start meeting people immediately once I moved, and it really helped me feel less lonely and isolated when I was first settling into Singapore. I've also found that people are really open to introducing you to their friend groups here, and I've been able to meet a lot of people organically through friends of friends. So if you're interested in moving to a place where building a new social network will be fairly easy, Singapore should be high on your list. Honestly, one of the main reasons that I was really looking forward to moving to Singapore was because of the food scene. Singapore is a foodie's paradise, and the hawker centers live up to the hype. You can go to a hawker center, which is basically a collection of stalls run by Singaporeans, and each will specialize in a certain type of dish or cuisine, and you can get a full meal for around 5 Singaporean dollars. Singapore is a melting pot of cultures, and the food scene really reflects that. Many of the famous dishes in Singapore are blends from different cultures that combine different elements to create a uniquely Singaporean dish. In the past few months living here, I've traveled to over 4 different countries already, and that's a testament to what a great travel hub Singapore is. In less than 3 hours, you can reach so many incredible places like Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, and Bali. Changi Airport is a global travel hub, which means there are lots of flight options, and it's easy to find flight deals, not only to the rest of Southeast Asia, but also the rest of the world. One of the main considerations that most people have when moving to a new country is whether there will be any barriers with the language spoken. Luckily, in Singapore, everyone speaks English, and so you don't need to worry about having to learn a new language or facing challenges when it comes to communicating with others. That's not to say that English is the only language spoken in Singapore. Many people also speak Mandarin, Tamil, and Malay, but learning these languages is a choice, not necessity. One of the main reasons that I've enjoyed my time in Singapore over the past few months so much is that I can be completely independent and I don't need to worry as much about my safety as a woman. In the cities that I've lived in the US, I was fairly independent, but was always on high alert when traveling by myself, especially at night. Even taking public transit was a risk because assaults and robberies happened quite frequently. In Singapore, public safety is incredible. Particularly as a woman, I think this is a really compelling reason to consider moving to Singapore. So those are some of the best parts about living in Singapore, but what are the downsides? Unlike the rest of Southeast Asia, Singapore has a very high cost of living. Recently, Singapore was ranked the 13th most expensive city in the world for expats to move to. Within the past year, inflation has also hit Singapore, and you can see in this chart how much inflation has impacted each spending category. For me, these financial considerations would not be deal breakers, but whenever you move to a new country, it's important to have a full picture of all of the costs that would be associated with that move. If you've moved to Singapore in the last year, like myself, then congratulations, you've experienced the worst rental market in Singapore's history. Rental prices for private properties that most expats live in have increased from 20 to 40%. This rental market situation is due to a few factors. There's a lack of supply right now because construction during COVID was halted, and many people that wanted new apartments built or remodeled were forced to then live in private housing units that are typically the only option that expats can live in. There's also been increasing immigration from nearby countries like Hong Kong, which puts more strain on the already limited housing supply. Again, for me, this wasn't a deal breaker, but it is something that I wish I had known more about before I moved because it would have really informed my housing search. Singapore is pretty infamous for its strict policies and rules. I'm sure a fun fact that many of you know about Singapore is that it is illegal to chew gum. This isn't entirely true, but it is true that Singapore does have quite stringent rules and regulations, and as a foreign worker, you do need to be very aware that you're abiding by the law. Over the past few years, when COVID levels were high in Singapore, masks were required in both indoor and outdoor settings, and there were many expats that were deported because they didn't follow these rules. While Singapore has since eased a lot of the regulations related to mask wearing and COVID, there are still other rules that you should be aware of and make sure that you follow them. When I first moved to Singapore, many of the people that I met jokingly asked me why I would move here when over the past few years they had been stuck and were itching to get out and explore other countries. Singapore is quite small geographically. Fun fact, it is 0.9 times the size of New York City, and you can drive from end to end in less than 2 hours. Despite its small size, I still think that there is so much to do and see in Singapore. Each neighborhood has a distinct feel and a unique history. If you are someone that enjoys nature and going on hikes, you may want to reconsider Singapore because it is a city-state. And that means that while there are some great parks and hikes that you can do, it won't be on the same scale as other places that you might be used to living, particularly in the US. This last drawback is not something that I've personally experienced myself, but I have definitely heard from friends that there's a very intense work culture here. So when moving to Singapore and working for companies that are based in Singapore, you should be aware that may be different than what you're used to. If you are coming here on a work visa, that means that your work sponsorship will be tied to your employment at a company. And so it may not be as easy to switch jobs if you're not satisfied with your employer once you've arrived in Singapore. Overall, I have loved living in Singapore for the past 6 months, and I'm so excited for the next 6 months that lie ahead. Feel free to leave a comment on this video if there are any questions that you have about what it's like to live in Singapore, and also what other kind of content that you'd be interested in seeing from an American young professional living in Singapore. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.